There comes a moment that almost nobody talks about. Not the breakup itself, not the cold goodbye, not the silence after the last message is read and left untouched. I mean the moment after all that. The moment when the noise dies, the distractions wear off, the new faces lose their shine, and the person who ran finally has to sit alone with what they were trying so hard not to feel. That is the moment an avoidant realizes the grass was never greener. And if you have ever been left staring at your phone, replaying every conversation, wondering how someone could pull away from something real as if it meant nothing, this truth will cut deep. Because the silence was never proof that you were forgettable. Their distance was never proof that you were too much. And the way they turned away was never the clean, confident act it looked like from the outside. It was panic in a polished mask. It was overwhelm dressed up as certainty. It was someone trying to outrun the emotional intensity they did not know how to hold. That is the brutal truth. Avoidants do not always leave because they do not care. Sometimes they leave because they care so much that their system interprets closeness as danger. And instead of leaning in, instead of naming the fear, instead of saying, "I am overwhelmed and I do not know how to stay open," they do what they have trained themselves to do for years. They detach. They intellectualize. They go cold. They convince themselves that what they felt was not that deep, not that rare, not that important. And for a while, that story works. For a while, they feel relief, not peace. Relief. There is a difference. Peace softens the body. Relief only removes pressure. Peace feels grounded. Relief feels like escaping a fire and calling that freedom. So when they first walk away, when they first choose distance over depth, it can even look like they are doing better, sleeping better, smiling more, acting lighter, posting more, talking to new people, reclaiming space, looking unbothered. But the nervous system keeps records the mind tries to delete, and this is where psychology becomes painfully intimate. Because when someone with avoidant patterns gets too close to love, too close to vulnerability, too close to real emotional dependence, the amygdala can start reading connection as a threat. Not because love is dangerous, but because their body learned long ago that closeness comes with pressure, engulfment, disappointment, obligation, or loss of control. So when intimacy deepens, their stress response rises. Cortisol increases. The body becomes vigilant. Their chest tightens. Their thoughts speed up. Small needs from you can start to feel enormous to them. A simple emotional conversation feels like drowning. A normal desire for reassurance feels like a demand. The relationship starts to feel heavy, but not because you are heavy, because their unhealed nervous system cannot tell the difference between intimacy and entrapment. So they create distance, and when they do, dopamine steps in like a drug. Freedom, novelty, space, no one needing anything, no one seeing too much, no one pulling at the locked door inside them. Their body rewards escape. It tells them, yes, this is safer, this is better, this is what you needed. And that is why, in the beginning, they can look so sure. That is why they can leave something meaningful and act like it was easy. That is why you can sit there devastated while they seem almost untouched. But avoidant relief has an expiration date. Because once the threat of intimacy is gone, something else appears. Something quieter. Something harder to numb. Absence. And absence has a voice. At first, it whispers. Then it lingers. Then it starts showing up in places they did not expect. In the drive home after being out with people they did not really care about. in the strange emptiness after a laugh that did not reach their chest, in the new conversation that feels polished but thin, in the bed that feels bigger, colder, less alive, in the moment they reach for their phone to tell someone something funny, painful, human, and realize the one person who used to feel like home is no longer there. That is when the fantasy begins to crack. Because greener grass is often just emotional distance painted in attractive colors. And distance is seductive when closeness terrifies you. But eventually, the mind can no longer keep calling numbness peace. Eventually, the body notices that the excitement of newness does not equal the safety of being known. Eventually, the avoidant starts comparing. Not always consciously. Sometimes it happens in flashes. A sentence someone else says that feels empty compared to the way you used to understand them without explanation. A touch that feels performative compared to the intimacy they once ran from. A silence that feels dead compared to the silence they shared with you. The kind that was full, breathing, almost sacred. Then comes the thought they hate most. What if I lost something real because I was afraid to stay? That thought does not arrive dramatically. It slips in when they are least defended. And once it gets in, it changes everything. Because now the story of "I left because it wasn't right" starts colliding with another truth. Maybe it was right. Maybe I just didn't know how to receive it. This is the part nobody sees. People talk about avoidance like they are untouched, unbothered, emotionally absent creatures who simply move on and never look back. But many of them do look back. They just do it in private, in silence, in shame, in delayed waves that hit long after everyone expects them to be over it. That is why their regret often arrives late. Not because your connection meant little, because their defenses are slow to collapse. Their feelings have to travel through layers of armor before they become conscious. What you felt in real time, they often feel in retrospect. What broke you immediately can haunt them months later. By the time they realize the depth of what was there, you may already be healing, already changing, already becoming someone they can no longer access in the same way. And that is where the power begins to shift. Not when you beg harder, not when you explain yourself one more time, not when you prove your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding intimacy. The shift happens when you stop performing availability for someone who only values connection once they have lost access to it. Silence becomes the core concept here, but not the manipulative kind. Not silence as punishment, not silence as a tactic to force a reaction. I mean sacred silence, clean silence. The kind that happens when you stop chasing someone into emotional adulthood. The kind that says, without saying a word, I will not abandon myself to remain understandable to someone who only understands me in my absence. That silence does something profound. To you, it begins restoring your nervous system. The constant cortisol drip of waiting, checking, wondering, interpreting every delay and every cold reply starts to settle. Your body slowly relearns what life feels like without emotional whiplash. You stop living in anticipation of crumbs. You stop building your day around whether they notice you. Dopamine stops being tied to their inconsistency. You begin returning to yourself. And to them, if they ever cared more than they knew how to express, your silence becomes a mirror. Because now there is no pressure to react against, no emotional intensity to flee, No message to delay replying to. No reassurance to withhold. No one chasing them into a position of power they secretly resent. Just space. And space is where their truth gets louder. They start wondering, then checking, then remembering, then feeling. This is the irony that wounds so many people. When you were emotionally available, they felt crowded. When you disappeared, they finally had room to feel the weight of your absence. They remember the way you looked at them when they were pretending not to need anyone. They remember how safe it felt to be understood without having to perform. They remember the softness they rejected because it scared them. They remember your steadiness, your depth, your warmth, your patience. The very things they once treated as ordinary begin to glow in memory once they are gone. And no, this is not because you were a placeholder until someone better came along and failed. It is because avoidance distorts value in real time. What is consistent feels dull to a dysregulated system. What is safe can feel suspicious. What is healthy can feel unfamiliar. And what is unfamiliar often gets mislabeled as not enough, simply because it does not trigger the same chaos the person unconsciously associates with love. So they leave, looking for spark, certainty, ease, excitement, freedom, only to discover that what they called boredom was actually emotional safety, and what they called chemistry somewhere else was often just nervous system activation dressed up as passion. That realization is brutal, because now they cannot escape the truth that the grass looked greener, mostly because they were standing too close to their own fear to see clearly. Picture them for a moment. It is late. Their apartment is quiet. They have done all the things people do to avoid themselves. The scrolling, the casual conversations, the flirting that leads nowhere, the overwork, the pretending, the random bursts of motivation, the emotional shutdown disguised as self-focus. But tonight, none of it numbs the ache. Something reminds them of you. Maybe it is a song. Maybe it is the way someone says a phrase you used to say. Maybe it is watching other people connect in a way that feels effortless, and suddenly realizing they had that once and could not tolerate it. Maybe it is nothing specific at all, just a strange heaviness in the chest. And then the thoughts begin. Did I sabotage the one person who actually saw me? Why did I feel trapped when all they did was love me? Why does everyone else feel less real? Why do I miss the very closeness I pushed away? This is the moment avoidants rarely admit out loud. The moment they are no longer chasing freedom. They are chasing the feeling they lost when they lost you. Not because you were perfect, not because relationships do not have problems, but because there is a difference between leaving a genuinely wrong connection and fleeing a good one because it activated your wounds. They can feel that difference eventually. And when they do, many of them start behaving in ways that seem confusing from the outside. They circle back indirectly. They watch your stories. They send something casual. They test the waters with a neutral message. They mention a memory. They ask a small question that is not really about the question. They act as if nothing happened, because vulnerability still terrifies them, even now. But underneath that detached tone is often a storm. Because now the power dynamic is no longer what it was. When you were waiting, they could keep control through distance. When you are no longer waiting, they lose that control. And loss of control makes suppressed attachment come alive. Now they are the one anticipating your response. Now they are the one reading into pauses. Now they are the one wondering whether you still care. Now they are the one feeling the ache of not knowing. This is what people mean when they say the avoidant starts chasing. But it is deeper than chasing. It is confrontation. A confrontation with the feelings they postponed, the grief they delayed, the intimacy they devalued only to realize it was rare. And this is where you must be careful. Because the return of someone who once withdrew can be intoxicating, especially if you spent months feeling discarded. Their attention can feel like justice. Their longing can feel like proof. Their sudden softness can feel like everything you prayed for. But a returning person is not the same thing as a transformed person. Read that again in your bones. Regret is not repair. Missing you is not maturity. Wanting access again is not the same as developing the capacity to hold intimacy without running from it. If they come back unchanged, they will repeat the pattern. Maybe more slowly, maybe more beautifully, maybe with more convincing words. But the nervous system does not care about promises. It reveals itself in behavior. And without real self-awareness, accountability, and emotional work, they will once again confuse closeness with pressure, love with loss of control, and your needs with their own unresolved fear. So if they return, you do not collapse. You do not rush to soothe the person who once abandoned you emotionally. You do not hand them access because they finally felt the consequences of losing you. You stay rooted. You watch. You listen beneath the words. You ask yourself the question that changes everything. Does their return honor my peace or threaten it? Because this story is not ultimately about whether an avoidant realizes the grass was not greener. Many of them do. The deeper story is whether you still believe your worth depends on being chosen after being lost. That is the trap. That is the old pattern trying to wear a romantic face. If your healing still needs them to come back and confirm your value, then a part of you is still living inside the wound they triggered, still waiting for the person who left to reverse the verdict, still hoping their regret will become your redemption. But your redemption was never supposed to come from their realization. It comes from yours. From the moment you understand that being loved inconsistently can create addiction, not intimacy, that confusion is not chemistry, that longing is not always evidence of destiny, that someone can deeply feel for you and still be too emotionally unprepared to love you well, that their overwhelm does not make your needs excessive, that their withdrawal does not make you hard to love, and most importantly, that your power returns the second you stop measuring your value by the emotional availability of a wounded person. That is the identity shift. You are no longer the one standing outside someone's locked inner world, begging to be let in. You are no longer trying to translate your tenderness into a language their fear can tolerate. You are no longer shrinking, softening, over-explaining, or self-abandoning just to remain emotionally acceptable. You are no longer hypnotized by potential. You become someone else now, someone quieter, stronger, cleaner. Someone who understands that love without safety is a wound in disguise. Someone who knows that being missed is not the same as being met. Someone who can hold compassion for why they ran without volunteering to be run from again. And that changes the entire field. Because when an avoidant realizes the grass was not greener, they may finally see your value. But by then, the real transformation is that you see it too. Not because they came back, not because they apologized, not because they finally understood what they lost, but because surviving their absence forced you to confront the place inside yourself that kept confusing pursuit with devotion. And once you heal that, everything changes. You stop trying to be unforgettable to people who are committed to forgetting themselves. You stop calling emotional unavailability mysterious. You stop romanticizing almost. You stop waiting for delayed love to arrive in a form that no longer costs you your dignity. You become deeply, almost frighteningly unavailable to anything that asks you to betray your own nervous system in exchange for closeness. That is real power. Not making them miss you. Not making them obsess. Not becoming the lesson they never recover from. Real power is becoming so anchored in your own worth that whether they regret losing you becomes emotionally irrelevant. Because the truth is, some of them will realize it. Some of them will feel it all at once, too late, in the quiet, after the novelty fades and the emptiness speaks. Some of them will understand that the grass was not greener. It was just farther away from vulnerability. And some of them will carry that realization for a long time. But your life cannot be built around whether another person eventually catches up to the truth. Your life must be built around what is true now. You deserved consistency then. You deserve clarity now. You deserve a love that does not need to lose you in order to recognize you. So let them have their realization. Let them sit with the echo. Let them wonder why no one feels like you did. Let them face the cost of confusing peace with boredom and distance with freedom. That is their journey. Yours is different. Yours is to walk away from the altar of almost love and never kneel there again. Yours is to become someone whose presence is not a negotiation. Someone whose heart is soft, but not self-sacrificing. Someone who no longer chases people into emotional honesty. Someone who can love deeply without abandoning themselves in the process. And when you become that person, something extraordinary happens. The silence that once felt like rejection becomes protection. The loss that once felt personal becomes revealing. The ache that once begged for their return becomes the fire that remakes your identity. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough for them?" And you start saying, with a calm that changes your entire life, "I was enough. They were overwhelmed by what they did not know how to keep." That sentence will free you, because it places the truth where it belongs, not on your worth, on their capacity. And those are not the same thing. So if they ever realize the grass was not greener, let that be their awakening. Yours is bigger. Yours is the moment you realize that the love you were begging them to give, the safety you were trying to earn, the peace you were hoping they would finally choose, you can become the source of that within yourself. And once you do, the whole game ends. No more auditioning. No more waiting. No more mistaking delayed regret for destiny. Just you. Clear-eyed, unhooked, whole, and impossible to abandon, because you no longer abandon yourself.